Government agencies, like most enterprises, are continuing to adjust their technology strategies to better support a hybrid work environment. Hybrid work arrangements help agencies improve their ability to hire and retain talent and remain operational in the face of disruptions. Consequently, the need to modernize infrastructure to ensure secure access to resources remains critical to agencies. I'm Wyatt Cash with Scoop News Group, and joining us to talk about that today and about enabling a hybrid workforce is Kurt Steege, Chief Technology Officer for ThunderCat Technology, and André Mendes, Chief Information Officer at the Department of Commerce. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. And Andre, I'd like to start with you. Give us a brief sense of the scope of the department's operations at the Department of Commerce in terms of an IT perspective. And what's your department's experience in adapting its IT platforms to support a remote workforce?
Well, as your audience probably knows, the Department of Commerce is composed of a substantial number of bureaus, some very large, like NOAA, the USPTO, Census, and NIST, and other smaller ones like BEA, ITA, BIS, NTIA, and NTIS, which together comprise an enormous variety of missions, an enormous diversity of missions, and as a result, by virtue of its evolution over the decades, a very diverse IT environment. We have been trying to standardize a lot of that, and of course, the migrations to the cloud have helped a lot in terms of bringing us together in a more standardized environment that can then be interfaced. From a hybrid standpoint, from a hybrid workforce standpoint, we actually were very, very fortunate that a lot of our bureaus already had a fairly heavy presence in the cloud prior to the pandemic starting. And so for us, there were literally almost no challenges going from being fully in the office to being fully remote in a couple of days. I know that some agencies struggled with VPN loads, with the very large ones. We didn't have that problem, fortunately. And with some of our environments, because they were already highly distributed, let's say, for example, ITA, which has presence in over 150 countries, and NOAA, which of course has presence in thousands of locations with sensors throughout the United States and the rest of the world, and Antarctica, and so on and so forth. That was a very easy transition. The census has been used to operating remotely because whenever the decennial takes place, there are going to be anywhere between 350 and 600,000 data collectors out there operating remotely anyway. So for us, it was a very, very easy transition, thankfully.
And Kurt, talk about what you're seeing in the way of public sector organizations as they're trying to optimize their IT strategies to support more of a hybrid workforce.
Sure. Thanks, Wyatt. It's interesting. So ThunderCat, we handle both public, private, and all the different areas as well in terms of SLED as well. And I think there's a lot of things that are happening right now. We're at this really kind of interesting inflection point where you have an incredible amount of technology, incredible amount of powerful technology from a bunch of different areas. But you've also got this extreme proliferation of data that we've been talking about for many years. The volume and the velocity of that data that's coming in. Getting to the point where you can work through those things and understand how to best utilize that data for your mission or your business at that point is becoming one of the key points there. And as we go through this and we take a look at it, optimizing the access to that data, and especially on the public sector, one of the things that I've said for a couple of years now is I think that data and information is probably the most important thing that the federal government produces at this point. It's not a byproduct; it is the product that most people need, both from a government employee standpoint and from a citizen standpoint. You talk about all the information that the Department of Commerce produces. NOAA was one of the ones there. So all the weather data that's out there and understanding how those patterns are affecting not only their agency, but also us when we want to figure things out. I'm trying to figure out what the weather's going to be like so I can go pick up my daughter from college in Vermont, So, and everything around that. So I think that's probably the biggest thing that folks are struggling with in terms of how we get that work out there.
Andre, back to you. Talk a little about what issues that you're now trying to address going forward. There's so much on CIO's plates, and now with the introduction of AI, there are a lot of issues around being able to support a hybrid workforce. What are kind of the top items that you're looking at?
Well, I mean, when you're looking at a remote workforce in the current environment, right? Historically, that has been supported by VPN environments, in terms of securing the organization. But as it has become widely demonstrated, the VPN environment really offers a substantial potential for entry for people who are trying to compromise this. And so for us, the migration to the zero trust architecture and the elimination of VPNs is paramount as fast as possible. And so we have been working very, very hard to implement it across the entire department. I think what makes us different and somewhat special is that we've adopted a whole of commerce ZTA architecture that was delineated with the best and brightest from the bureaus, and have started implementing that with a new EDR package, a new ICAM package, and a new SASE package that have all been centrally purchased and are being centrally managed and implemented. So that's a big thing. Now, AI for us, I don't want to say it's old news, right? I mean, we have been using AI for a long time. Of course, generative AI falls into a different category. And so we want to make sure that we have the guardrails around it to make sure that our data didn't get compromised going out and that we didn't use compromised data coming in. And so that has become very important. So we establish a process through which people can submit generative AI projects that they would like to work on. And in order to do that efficiently, we actually used our technology insertion processes and procedures in our enterprise architecture as a way of vetting those processes and project proposals, and then giving them either a yay or a nay, or a yay with conditions and guardrails that must be considered. So when you look at the impact that has had on us so far, it has been relatively minimal. I expect it to accelerate for two reasons. One, because people will become very much more accustomed to it, and so they will be able to leverage it better. But also the tools are going to increase their capability exponentially, absolutely exponentially, right? I have an old saying that says, things don't happen until they happen, and then you better run. And obviously, we are at that stage from a generative AI standpoint where the algorithms are coming fast and furious. The open source efforts are generating a velocity by virtue of competition that is increasing, the iterations of capability. And so that's going to be a constant challenge from this point going forward. I would posit that in 5 years, the position of Chief Artificial Intelligence Officer and CIO will be undistinguishable, and that we will be operating in an environment where AI, in all of its incarnations, will become the driving force for IT modernization and for functioning.
And then, Kurt, as agencies do consider improving their security resiliencies as they modernize their network, what steps do you recommend that agencies can take to design and implement systems being flexible that fit both their current and future hybrid workforce needs?
Sure. Yeah, thank you. First, I just want to touch on one thing that Andres had said. As a former chief enterprise architect, the approach that you're taking is exciting to hear, and I think it's the right, and it kind of leads into the answer to this question. And I decided to sort of enhancing security and resiliency. I'm going to use one of the old things that you keep hearing about in the past, like the KISS methodology. So, which was keep it simple, stupid. But what I did was kind of tweak it a little bit in the way that I approached it, and saying, like, first of all, and I think the Department of Commerce has done a great job with this, is know what you have, assess your environment, include not just the infrastructure. A lot of people make the mistake of just looking at your infrastructure and saying, okay, these are all the servers I have, and moving forward in that space, right? But you also need to understand the information that you're accessing, and where it's being housed, those critical, and then your user personas, understanding how the users of your environment, and especially in the commerce side, how citizen resources are going to utilize that information as well, in that hybrid. So it's that whole idea of sort of people, processes, and products, understanding overall architectures, and plan your security architecture and your overall architecture around that. So it's that sort of, hey, here's what I have, here's where I want to go. And then from that point, exactly to Andre's point as well. So it's like, we didn't talk before this, but I think we're both looking at it very similarly. It's like implement and evolve. So I implement and evolve your zero trust architecture. Same as above, it's not a product. I think a lot of folks will try to sell you a product and say, hey, this is how you do zero trust. You take this product. We tend to look at it more as an architecture and a mindset, based on what you have in that initial assessment, right? Protect the critical assets, and it's not just the tools. The critical assets are not the tools. It's the data itself. And once you know that, you can then use the NIST 800-207 documentation as your North Star guiding you, right? Take small achievable steps, as Department of Commerce is doing, right? Get there, taking the same approach, right? Always triangulating with, hey, here's the NIST guidance, here's my critical infrastructure, right? My critical assets, I should say infrastructure, apologies there, critical assets, and then always move forward. I'm reminded, as you're doing this kind of thing, of a sign I saw recently at when I ran the Chicago Marathon in October, was forward is a pace. Zero trust architecture is a marathon, if not a sprint. Moving forward, constantly moving forward and triangulating against those two things is probably the way to get there. And then next, sort of see your communication patterns. Once you have that architecture, understand network and system log visibility are critical to understand both north, south, and east-west traffic, and its effects on the organization. Start at the border, network border, taking things like firewalls and PCAP data, and then move inward. And then I'll also throw outward as well, because as we're dealing in hybrid cloud infrastructures, you're going to have whatever you have on premise, you're going to have what you have in the cloud as well. And ultimately understanding how traffic affects the network, but not only just the network, but how traffic affects infrastructure, how it affects data, and how it affects the personas over time. And then last, I would say, and it was also kind of alluded to just a minute ago, where stay on top of current and future technologies and the evolving standards with NIST and any other executive orders, right? Using tools like automation and machine learning to figure out the known bad on the security side, right? There's a lot of things that can be figured out by taking care of that known bad side, and it'll account for a large proportion. And then it takes that burden off your security professionals for the unknown things, the harder to find things. The proverbial needle in the haystack is easier to find if you remove most of the hay. Right. So, taking all those things into consideration, taking into, I know Andres was talking about the idea of, implementing generative AI projects. And a lot of that stuff is also applicable here in terms of learning how to work on your network and learning how to implement zero trust.
Appreciate that. And then lastly, Andre, what's different about your IT strategies today compared to maybe a couple of years ago in supporting today's federal workforce? And maybe what's one or two lessons that you'd offer other leaders about establishing a more agile and secure IT environment?
So, I hate to repeat some of what I said before, but the reality is that the zero trust architecture migration has changed the entire paradigm in terms of how we operate, right? Even today, if you look at the federal environments, you're going to see VPN existence still being, predominant for an enormous amount of functionality. That absolutely has to change. I think that a lot of the changes that we're seeing in the workplace have to do with culture now. right? I mean, there are two factors that I think are extremely important. One, the fact that historically, the entirely remote workforce, or even the amount of remote workforce that we have today, has not been, ubiquitous across the federal environment. Right? Companies like IBM have been working remotely for 30 years. A lot of companies that work across the world have entirely virtual environments and have had it for a couple of decades. In the government sector, that has not been the case. So all of a sudden, that becomes the case, and that requires some degree of reskilling of management techniques in terms of the employees, and also in the employees how they interact with both their management and their colleagues, and the understanding that the conversation at the office, it takes on a different quality. Not to say that it's better or worse. There's advantages to both sides of the equation, right? But there's difference, and so we need to adapt to that difference. The other issue that is becoming more and more into focus is the fact that the new generation of folks coming out of college that have evolved into their working relationships entirely virtually offer a different set of challenges. Again, it is not a question of being better or being worse. It's a question of being different, because not being in the office, not having that opportunity to have that social engagement that those of us of our generation have lived with our entire lives, and have leveraged and have taken advantage of, is become a little more difficult. And if you don't have the skills built in terms of relationship establishment in anything other than a virtual environment with professionals, that becomes very, very challenging. So we have to make sure that we can, to a large degree, educate people on how to operate in that environment, understand the challenges initially of establishing those relationships and management interactions, and then go from there. It cannot be done in a vacuum, and it cannot be ignored, right? I mean, we cannot afford to basically just say, oh, these young people just don't know how to operate in a professional environment. No, because guess what? In a decade, this will be their environment while we are enjoying retirement somewhere, hopefully, in a warmer climate, right? And so saying nay to their way of working is not something that is feasible. We just need to make sure that we come into an agreement on how to best leverage the different interactions between generations, and that we can leverage their creativity and their hopefully innovation, but in a different environment that requires different type of interactions.
Absolutely. Well, André Mendes and Kurt Steege, thank you so much for taking a few minutes to share your respective insights on preserving and building a more agile and secure IT environment, and doing so to meet the needs of today's hybrid workforce. So thank you both very much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Nice to meet you, Kurt.
Nice to meet you as well.
Take care.